Customer insights and customer discovery is one of the most important parts about creating a business, or at least developing a product. How do you know what to create if you don't know what your customers want? But just using text or a 1 to 5 scale maybe be like painting the Mona Lisa by only using an etch and sketch. You're missing out on a ton of valuable insights, or at least in this case, valuable information. We go over today how Philip and Voiceform are really changing the way surveys or at least information is collected by getting the answers from the customer's mouths, no pun intended, by using voice. Voiceform is the fastest way to analyze and collect user information, whether it be for your target market or to get insights from your pre-existing customers. We go over a variety of things today, how they use the power of AI and NLP to collect and aggregate this information to give you insights, the importance of incubators, and how Philip most importantly learned some valuable skills, and one of them being to think as big as possible when developing a business. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is how to develop an amazing product that customers actually want to use. Hope you guys enjoy this episode. Check out Voiceform, because if you're a business owner, if you work for a team and you want to get better insights from your customers, this is a great way to look at it and a great way to do it. Or also check out Voiceform just to learn how they're able to develop an amazing product that is growing at a very impressive rate. Hope you guys enjoy this episode. Follow along with Voiceform success, and please subscribe to the podcast.
My name is Philip. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders here at Voiceform. So Voiceform's a really easy to use customer feedback, customer insight tool that allows you to create, send and share surveys, forms, and questionnaires that people can speak into rather than just typing. So you're collecting a lot more descriptive answers. I believe it's anywhere from 3 to 4 times more descriptive answers, a lot more analysis from theme extraction to sentiment analysis, and a lot more. But yeah, that's who we are and what we do.
And how'd you get into this? Like, did you do a lot of surveys and you figured there was a disconnect between the information required and what you were getting, or how did you start or even be interested in this field in general?
Yeah, so is a two, actually a three-part thing. Now that you mentioned how was I interested in this field in general? So the first thing was, um, I was receiving a lot of surveys from work, and I specifically remember cooking dinner. This was kind of like where the inception of the idea came from. I haven't really shared this with many people,
Mhm.
so you're one of the only people. But essentially, I was cooking dinner one night and receiving a lot of surveys from my past job, and I just didn't have time to do it. And in my head, I was like, I wish I could just like speak into this thing, like it's Siri or like something like that,
Mhm.
because I use Siri a lot. And the idea kind of got into my head at that point. And then from there, it was just kind of in my mind, like thinking about it here and there. And then I realized I was doing a lot of customer interviews at my last job that took a lot of time. And
Mhm.
I would have to schedule the interview, do the interview, and then I'd listen to it after. It's taking me like 3, 4 hours every time. So I quickly came to realize that there kind of had to be a solution that could
Mhm.
automate the collection of your customer's voice. So I was looking around and I couldn't find anything that was simple. There were like APIs that you could use, but I'm not a developer. It's really difficult for a non-technical person to do. So I figured that, hey, why don't I build a quick MVP of a tool that allowed you to ask a text-based question, and they would respond just by receiving a
Mhm.
link to their phone or email. They click the record button, record their voice, and then from there you would get the response. So that was the original idea of how it came about. And surveys in general, I have always had so many business ideas, and I forget where I heard this, but someone said, if you ever have a business idea, survey 200 people and see if it's viable. And I would
Mhm.
always be sending Google Forms. So I've like honestly always been into surveys kind of thing.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was the biggest part of starting Voiceform was the problem I had with the customer interviews for sure.
And that's super interesting because I feel similar thing when they always say, when you're starting with an idea or MVP, you have to a lot of interviews. That's always the key. Like, is there a product market fit? Is there a product there? Are people always interested in it? So I've done hundreds of surveys, hundreds of in-person interviews as well. But especially now, I think, which is super interesting with like COVID and a lot of this work from home, is like and the big buzzword now, especially within education, is like asynchronous learning. So everything's trying to be asynchronous. But like you were saying, the idea to have a question or at least get some answers to questions that are asynchronous. You don't have to hop on a call for 1 hour to ask the same questions. And most of the time, from my experience when doing interviews or conducting, especially for like new business ideas, is that you as the interviewer, you want to have as little like emotion as possible. So even removing you can also be beneficial for getting answers to questions, especially if the classic like, how much would you pay for this product, or like what's your opinions of it, and then you never want to hurt the founder's emotions when you're like, this is crap. But at least being able to like, hey, I can answer this and kind of disconnect.
Oh, of course.
So
And like,
yeah,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, and I always found that the problem or you were solving was something I've seen lots of like text based surveys were either never responded well, or I couldn't get the right tone. Like, if the question was a little ambiguous, it was hard to always see like, are they like, for example, the classic question would be like, is this expensive? They'd say, yes or no. But the problem is being expensive is not bad. Maybe they're like, this is expensive, but I really want it. I just can't afford it. Or it's like, this is expensive because it's exclusive. Like there's benefits to different things. So I understand that the sentiment behind it is just as important as the answer sometimes.
For sure. And no, and that's all very like everything you said is exactly right on the money. And something else that we're seeing is a big part of it is just automating it. So just essentially creating a voice form, automating it, your customers receive it, and just receiving those insights over time. And you just don't even think about it. You go and check on your account. You see, oh, I have 100 new responses. You see the top mentioned themes. It really allows you to understand what people think of your brand. And our slogan internally is make your customers feel heard. And that's really what you
Mhm,
want to do. You want to make your
mhm.
customers feel like their opinions and their what they actually think of your brand is being heard, and you're making those changes.
So I guess funny enough is you're trying to create a tool that helps you send out surveys by making a survey tool. How did you test it out? Did you make a mock-up very quickly and send out like voice notes, or did you have to go through traditional way to say, hey, what you're filling in right now, do you hate it? Do you want something better? Like how did that testing work? Because you're kind of having a chicken and an egg problem. We're trying to improve on what they're currently using type thing.
So, so what we did was got a very basic MVP built,
Hmm.
and it was the product didn't even fully work, to be honest with you. And we released it on a platform called AppSumo. I don't know
Hmm.
if you've heard of it before, but AppSumo's like a software marketplace where you can find deals on different software products. So we released it there, and it did really well. And that was our initial kind of like entrance into the market.
Hmm.
And we started receiving a lot of feedback. They're like, "Hey, we love this. We use it for this. It's great for this. It's not good for this." And that was like our first kind of experience with people using our tool and people comparing the text to the voice.
Hmm.
And we call our app. So when we launched on AppSumo, we like it was just a really easy way to validate your idea. So like if anyone's listening to this that is starting a business or wanting to validate an idea, it's super simple. Like you just reach out to them, list your product at a massive discount. But like
Hmm.
at that point, our product didn't even fully work. If I'm being fully honest with you, like it did,
Hmm.
but it was breaking all the time, and it was just like unstable. But it really allowed us to find our niche and find out what people actually wanted from our product,
Hmm.
and more than that, how they're using it.
And when this was launched, was it still paid to use? Like, was there a small fee or was it
Yeah,
free?
it was paid to use. It was paid. Yeah,
Also, that's even better because I always found when speaking with founders and entrepreneurs is that if you offer for free, it's really hard to get good advice because people are not very invested in it. But like you said, if you're paying a few dollars, even if it's a few dollars, the
that's it.
responses you're getting are a little more validated because they paid. There is at least an intent to use. There is some monetary, so at least I think that's a really smart idea. At least getting a few dollars is nice, but also I think the feedback you get is so much more valid because they're actually a transaction occurring. It's not just like the family and friend thing where they're like, "I
Yeah.
love this. This is great." So
Well,
that's always
if it
unique.
If it was free, I could go to Dundas Square and get every single person to just sign up, but it wouldn't make sense because
Yeah.
everyone would just be signed up for free. But if getting businesses and getting people to part with their dollars is a hard thing to do. It's like I've tried other businesses before in the past. It's really hard um, to do. So like the fact that we had people paying us for the product that we had, we knew that there was there's huge potential in what we're doing, and not only the surveys, but like analyzing a lot more than just surveys,
Mhm.
but potentially calls as well, and a lot more. So, yeah, if anyone's starting a business or anything like that, I'd definitely recommend AppSumo.
And that's pretty impressive. That obviously getting launching the app, getting some paying customers on. Like you said, it's so difficult to get a dollar. I think people who haven't tried to start a business or at least been in sales, getting a dollar is so challenging. And the funniest thing I always find is like getting $10 versus $10,000 sometimes is almost as difficult as one another. Like getting the dollar is the hardest part. The amount, depending on the product, is almost like irrelevant. Like I've known people who sell $1 million deals. They're like they're the easiest deals, and then you try to sell like $100 product, and it's like speaking with legal fees. Then they're trying to like talk to their CFO, and you're like, this is your petty cash. Like you can make the decision, but getting a dollar is always hard, no matter how small it is. And I know a lot of people who work in sales know that, and it's always so annoying when you're like, this is so cheap for the reward you're getting. So, you launch it, you're getting a lot of feedback. Where do you put the focus? Because obviously, like surveys in general, like massive. You have students using them, you have businesses using them. Did you initially have or kind of have a focus like this is the niche we're trying to really fit into, or was it more open when you were starting just to kind of see where the interest was coming from?
Yeah, and I would say that's been our biggest hurdle. And to be
Mhm,
honest with you, in full transparency, it still is. Like,
mhm,
we have so many different people using the product for so many different things. So we're narrowing it down now to
mhm,
more kind of uh, insights for retail companies and
mhm,
CPG. And but in the start, it was just like literally everyone using it for product feedback and market research and
mhm,
customer feedback and lead gen forms and recruiting forms and employee feedback forms. So like
mhm,
it was good. There were a lot of different use cases, but if you speak to any devs out there, building for a number of different use cases from the start, you can end up with a Frankenstein product. So we've really refined our focus to focus on
mhm,
a few core avenues that
mhm,
we see our customers are getting value from with
mhm.
Voiceform.
I always find that's always a big challenge that when you have a lot of interested parties, saying no to people or at least saying like moving away from what they're saying is a skill you have to learn because I think that's one challenge a lot of early entrepreneurs find is that they're like, hey, the B2C market, they want to like this, and then the consumer market or the business side wants these features, and then you end up having 1,000 features that meets no one's needs exactly. And it's like what everyone always says on social media is you not everyone can love you. You have to have some haters to show that there's actually people who are like very passionate about your product and you or your content in general. So I know that's always a challenge to figure out where to put focus, especially when you're getting positivity from a lot of different people. And there's only
Yeah,
so much dev time and time you have in the day.
for sure. Yeah.
S- So
Yeah.
I was gonna say like so obviously you're you get some feedback. You're launching this product. Where like at what point do you realize, hey, there's a legitimate business here? This is something we can create and run. Was it pretty early on, or did it take some time to really make that leap from going from the corporate world to like the startup world, or at least viewing it as a legitimate idea? How early on in the process was this? Like when you had the cooking your dinner, you're like, this is a business I want to start, or did it take some time to really convince yourself that hey, maybe I want to a real business here, not just a like, one-off product or just a idea you may have had in the past?
Hmm. So I've always I've always tried to start many different
Mhm,
businesses. A lot of them failed. Some were okay, but for the most part, they failed. And I knew I always wanted to go into entrepreneurship full time again.
mhm,
I was working at a company. I was working at a startup as well, and I knew I was like I'm just gonna quit and dive into something full time that I'm really passionate about. And I've always been really passionate about like data
Mhm,
and surveys in general. And this was an idea that I was super interested in.
mhm,
I saw value in it. Then the AppSumo folks saw value in it,
mhm,
which really validated it. And then there were two things that happened. The first thing is my co-founders joined. So Harrison,
mhm,
who's our chief product officer, he messaged me
mhm,
on LinkedIn one day, and he was like, "Hey, super cool idea. Um, I'm down to kind of just follow your journey." And he was a product owner at TD Bank. I was like, "Oh, this is pretty
mhm,
interesting. Like TD's a legit company." So we just kept talking. He became a user, and then I was like, "Harrison, why don't you just join us?" So
mhm,
Harrison joined us, and Artem, our CTO, who was an engineer at Snap Commerce at the time,
mhm,
he joined us as well. And so our team got together, and I was like, okay, there's now other people that clearly see value in this. That's one kind of validator. These are high value people that can, be in full transparency, like working at a job, making great money, living a great life, but they're deciding to focus on voice form when there's really
mhm,
not much traction except for some
mhm,
people that paid for our product on AppSumo.
mhm,
Then I was doing LinkedIn outreach, and Slack became interested. And I was doing demos for them, and like they're like,
mhm.
"Hey, we're moving forward," and I was like, "Oh, can I swear on this or no?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was
You
like,
can,
"Oh
you can.
shit!" I was like, "Oh shit!" And at that moment, I'm like, "Okay, like Slack, one of the world's leaders in communication, wants
Mhm,
our product." And we move forward. They're a customer now. Down their sales cycle, so it took a little while, like any or large
mhm,
organization, but they move forward. And as soon as that kind of happened, I was like, okay, we have something here, and our team kind of really
mhm,
bought in. So we then applied to an accelerator. We applied to Berkeley Skydeck. Amazing
mhm.
program. If there's any entrepreneurs listening, also like I recommend applying there. And I'll never forget it. I don't know how much time we have. I can tell the story about that as well. But
Yeah.
um, we got into that accelerator, long story short, and we got some funding because of that, a little bit. And we're like, hey, we're all in. So we all bought in full time, and we went out to San Francisco to do the accelerator. And from there, we just like met so many amazing people, got a bunch of new customers, started building out our product, and that's really when we all bought in.
That that is quite a wild story. I mean, I think, like you said, like getting a legitimate customer and then having that oh shit moment. I think a lot of founders have that where they're talking to a customer. It's like I guess it's almost like a job interview where you're like talking to a customer and you're like, "Hey, I'm gonna pitch them. I've done so many pitches," and they're like, "Yeah, I'm interested." And you're like, "I was expecting this," but then at the same time, you were like, "Is this real?" It's like the
I
It's like the classic
Yeah,
what now? So I really empathize with your realization of like, oh, we have like a lot of work to do now, but there's like a legitimate goal and a tangible thing we can kind of get launched. So it's always cool to have that feeling, but at the same time, there is a little bit of like you said, like a panic, like, oh, this is real.
yeah.
Like it's no longer like a fairy tale. Like, hey, I'm just having a little fun side hustle I'm working on the side. There's a legitimate business here, which is
Oh
always
yeah.
exciting, but also like the trial by fire.
It was crazy. I remember when Slack told us they're like, "Yeah, we want to move forward." I was like, "What?" Like our product, it worked. Like I said
Hmm.
earlier, like it barely worked. It worked, but like it was just like there wasn't much there. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? It was a very basic product that like, and like the fact that they saw value in just that product, they're like,
Hmm.
"Oh my god." And I remember I've always looked up to Slack. I've been a user.
Hmm.
I'm sure almost everyone that's listening is a user.
Yeah.
You're probably a user.
Yeah.
I wanted to work there, and I think I got rejected like 3 years ago.
Hmm.
And then they became a customer. I'm like, I guess I kind of work there again. I kind of work there now. But yeah, so
So
that
funny.
was a validator. And now since then, like we've gotten a bunch of other customers of similar
Mhm.
stature, which just keeps validating it.
So you talked a little bit about going obviously to California to do the accelerator program. Like, what made you take the steps to do it, and kind of what was the learning from there? Because I know a lot of people have maybe done accelerators or launchpad style programs, but kind of what made you say, you know what, we should apply and try to get somewhere to help build a foundation? And what it's always a hot button topic of like you know education versus trying, and some people find value. Kind of what did you find value in doing that program that you felt you maybe would have been more challenging to kind of learn on your own or do on your own?
First thing that comes to mind is the ability to think bigger. Like, they really make you think bigger. So when we went in, we're like, "Yep, we're this voice survey tool,
Mhm,
um, that you can send surveys with
mhm,
voice, and that's it." And we weren't really thinking about the future, but
mhm,
where we wanna go is, like, we wanna be the go-to place for collecting and analyzing voice. So
mhm,
that's really our goal now, and, like, whether that means surveys or other places where you can collect voice.
mhm,
Um, really where we're going, and it allowed us to really think bigger. And then
mhm,
the they help you a lot when you're there,
mhm,
from the funding to the introductions, and then ultimately the other founders that are accepted there are like from all around the world. There's companies from Germany. Um, they're actually our friends, so they're
mhm,
called Rico. I
mhm,
recommend reaching out to them. There's founders in Argentina, from France, all over the
mhm,
world. These people are literally changing the world, and like
mhm.
those, just learning from the other founders as well was huge.
That I feel like that's one of the biggest things, especially with those with any program, of getting like-minded individuals together. The like osmosis of learning from others is almost invaluable, and I think that's one of the things that everyone always talks about. Like depending on if you like or dislike education, I know we both went to Laurier, but some people, I think the biggest thing with university or any education in general is just getting a group of like-minded people together, and then the ability to like
Yeah.
bounce ideas off of and get creative is hard to describe how valuable it is, but also it's just like the from a lot of people I've talked to, especially going through other accelerator programs, like the velocity of adaptation is huge. Like you're changing and adapting and growing your business so much faster when it's semi-competitive also, but also you have other people who are like, you're like, man, one day I want to close a seven-figure deal, and then the person beside you just closes one. You're like, oh, it is possible. I think, like you said, like the ability to think bigger, but also be realize that hey, it is possible to have this amount of revenue, these amount of deals, to build a tool like this because person sitting beside me just did this, and they're real. They're not just figment of, you know, 30 years ago when I started my company. It's a real person that's right beside you.
No, for
So
sure. And
what
like,
mhm.
the one thing
Okay,
about
go ahead,
Skydeck,
go ahead. Mhm,
the one thing about Berkeley Skydeck, which is different, I've heard from other
mhm,
accelerators, is like, so like I worked at a YC company.
mhm,
So, and I know people that have gone through YC, and obviously it's like the top accelerator in the world.
mhm,
Everyone knows it, but I've heard very cutthroat. It's like you're
mhm.
in business school. It's very competitive. I've never been though, so I don't know. I could be
Yeah.
wrong. I've heard it's very competitive, but Skydeck is like, it was not competitive with the other startups at all. It wasn't.
Mhm,
And like it was like we were all in one big group, and to your point, there were founders that knew so much more than me, and I'd
mhm,
be like I remember one time when I was speaking with investors, I didn't know all the terms, for example.
mhm,
Like I didn't know how a safe note worked. And I
mhm,
went up to another founder. I'm like, "Hey, I know you guys just did this. Like, can you walk me through like how this works?"
mhm,
And he'd be like, "Yeah, let's grab a room. Let's go."
mhm,
And like it happened every day. And like for example, I had founders come up to me and be like, "Hey, I know you were in sales. Like, how would you position this call that we have?" And I'd help
mhm,
there, and it was so
mhm,
helpful. And then we would all like go for drinks after and like just hang out, and like we actually all became really close friends. And the camaraderie and like the team environment at Skydeck was just like I would go through the program again if I could.
mhm.
Doesn't make sense for our business now, but I would literally just keep going through it because it was
Mhm.
amazing.
I think that's a big thing. And I've worked for, I think, three YC companies. One, I was in university and they were in YC at the time. And I didn't want to, they're like, do you want to fly down? I'm like, I'm 18. I was like 19 years old. I'm like, I don't want to go fly down with a bunch of 30-year-olds and live with them in an apartment. This is just a little weird. I've just met you online. Like, I've heard horror stories about this when I was a child, learning about what the internet is. But like you said, the pace and the like competitiveness was a challenge for them as well. Where I mean, it could be some people say it's a Canadian thing, but others, but similar to funny enough, business school. When I did my MBA over in Vancouver, so at UBC, and the difference between apparently UBC and UFT is that like at UFT, everyone wants to be a consultant, hyper competitive. At UBC, West Coast lifestyle, everyone wants to help
Yeah,
the environment, be nice, super friendly. Like I'd have a interview with a consulting firm, and I'd have 5 people back to back help me do interview prep and help me with interviews. And
yeah,
that was amazing. Where I've heard my friends who went to other maybe more competitive or at least in like more cutthroat schools, it was like you have an interview, you have to hide it because someone else is gonna say you're stealing my job. Where I never felt that going through it. So I know when you speak about like working together and someone saying like, "Hey, I'm trying to do sales. Can you just give me your ideas?" Or asking for help and people being like, "Hey, like rising tide lifts all ships. There's no you succeed helps me succeed" is very nice, especially when building the community. And
for
how
sure.
long was that program? Was it just a few months? Was it a how long did
Six
it end up
months.
being? Oh wow, so
6 months.
pretty
Yeah,
quick.
so it was yeah, it was good. It was we're 2 months remote, and then
Mhm,
or 2 months in person, and then so the first month was or second month was in person, and then the last
mhm.
month was in person, and the rest was remote.
Was that the program structure? Was it due to COVID as well?
Due to COVID. I think in the past it was all in person, then during
Mhm,
COVID it was all remote, and then we were the first batch that was partially in person,
mhm,
and I think they did a really good job of like keeping it safe and
mhm,
just like a good amount of us.
mhm,
And it was in the middle of Omicron, so we were gonna come in February as well,
mhm,
but they're like, no, just come in March
mhm.
or April when it dies down. So it was good. Yeah.
I always think having parts in person is always helpful just to build the connections as well.
Hmm.
So you go through this program, things are up and running. What how I guess this is always an interesting question is like how do you know what to build in your product? Like obviously, like you said, you're getting a lot of feedback. Like how do you differentiate between like a nice to have and a need to have type thing? Is there a just like a methodology or like an end goal, or is it really? I mean, a lot of companies do it based on like what customers you're going after and like what they require. Like, how do you choose what to do? Because I think, especially right now, it's like developing things is challenging. It takes time, and time is very limited in life typically.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I think, and I have to give credit to Harrison and Artem on this, just because I tend to be not very organized, and they've kind of been owning this entire process.
Mhm,
But I think what we do is, I think it's if the feature gets mentioned more than 4 times by a paying customer,
mhm,
then we will kind of like escalate it, and we have a document tracking which features are being requested. Like I remember there was one feature that was mentioned like 37 times, and then another one, the next one down was like 11 or something like that.
mhm,
And we're like, okay, clearly we know which what we need to build here. So
mhm,
we just want to our motto or
mhm,
mission. I don't even know the right term, but
mhm,
making your customers feel heard. We want to live and breathe that as well. So by delivering on those features, um, we're able to do that. And yeah, it's typically we have like an internal doc where we track all the
mhm.
requests.
That is super useful. I've done that with a few companies, but the number of times things are stayed is so important. I heard a story. This is for sure not a good way of running a business or a good way of even as like an individual listening to your boss. But someone would say every request they would get, they would delete, like just delete the request, and if it was requested again, they would know it's important. In my head, that made sense until I realized
Mhm.
that most times your boss doesn't want to keep reminding you. But like in business, when you have a lot of customers, it's a useful methodology of being like, "Hey, we're at a note here," and then, like you said, number of times requested increases priority, at least to look at it to see if it fits in the mission as well.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I've obviously depending on what's requested, sometimes what they're requesting is either impossible to do or completely out of left field. Like the classic, like
Hmm.
needs to be cheaper. You're like, well, every money's always better. It's the classic. I'd always say, especially when giving advice for people like applying to jobs or having interviews or trying to get raises. Like no employee will ever say, "I want to make less money." It's like the classic thing, like more money. Well, okay. Besides that, like what else with this product or with this role would you like to do? So knowing where to like cut out the noise and really where to focus.
Yeah.
So it sounds like obviously you have like a pretty good feedback structure. You're building a lot of unique features with it. When it comes to voice, obviously, like one of the unique things about it is that there is like sentiment, there is emotion behind it. And you talked a little bit about like breaking it down, especially when collecting information, kind of having a way of parsing or looking at it. How did you like get into that? Like, was it just building? One thing you have on your website, which is I also enjoy, is that like you don't you talk very clearly about like what you're trying to do and how you're trying to build it. How with voice and everything, a lot of times people always throw in a lot of AI. Was it a conscious thing not to like I always dislike when people
Yeah.
do this a lot, but like to not be like AI focused, AI, and really make it more human, human focused, being like this is the results you're getting, not trying to bloat it up with using fancy tech terms in that sense. Because it is, I mean, using natural language processing or anything like that is pretty techy in itself. It's not that simple, or at least that common these days yet.
So that's exactly it. And honestly, like that is you hit it right on. Like we're trying to make collecting voice accessible, and like every other company, literally every single one that's doing voice, they either have .ai in their name somewhere, or they have um, AI. Like there's something to do with AI, and
Mhm,
like for us, we want to make it simple. Our name is Voiceform. It makes
mhm,
like voice form makes sense. Like you get it
mhm.
right away, and it's we're trying to make it as simple as possible. So yeah, there is. I'm sorry, I think I forgot the other part of the question, but it was yeah. We're just trying to make it super simple and accessible to not just engineers, but marketers and salespeople and um, insights and
Mhm.
research professionals.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I've talked to a lot of businesses or even people within the AI field, and it's always for techie people they always get upset when they're like, "Why is everything AI?" There's also half the time no AI in a lot of the products. It's like AI dog walking app. You're like, why does there have to be AI? And I mean, over the past few years, I've advised some companies where it's like blockchain. They're like, we do this with blockchain. You're like, why is blockchain relevant? And a lot of times you just want to throw it in to sound cool. But half the time when you
Yeah,
have someone who knows it, they're like, this is irrelevant. You could literally use an Excel spreadsheet or just track it on like a billing sheet. And they're like, nah, but you want to be cool. We want to make it way more complex. But like
for
how you said,
sure.
like
Just
when you look
simple.
at your product, it's very clear what it does and how it works and kind of being voice.
For
So
sure.
a lot of obviously like unique things come with surveys and kind of collecting information. How and one unique thing we made a funny enough a LinkedIn post about this today is that like collecting information about your own product through your product. How does that work? Is that a weird feeling being like, hey, can you give us feedback on it? Or do you find that you actually get better feedback because they actually have to use the app? So they can't really lie about it in the sense that they're using it. So if there are frustrations or if they do love it, you know for sure every user giving you answer has used the application.
Yeah, it's different when we do it rather than our customers because our customers see value in it because they're paying for the product and they're
Mhm,
using it with their customers. So they get really excited when they get to fill out like when they're filling out a voice form, and we
mhm,
get excited too, obviously. Um, so yeah, like collecting feedback using voice form is amazing. Obviously, I'm going to say that,
mhm,
but it really is like we're providing an easier way for our customers to give us feedback. Just super simple. It takes a few seconds at sometimes,
mhm,
and you're collecting a lot more information. It's a it's a no brainer. If you I did my pitch at the end of Berkeley Skydeck,
mhm,
and I ended it off with like, this is a no brainer because it just
mhm.
makes sense. And someone came up to me, they're like, I was thinking the same thing. So it just really is. It just like I'm not going to keep plugging it, but it just like way easier to collect feedback with our tool.
What you kind of remind me of something is one thing that's always difficult with typical surveys is like how to structure them and build it. Do you find that a lot, like you said, it's simple. Do you find a lot of users just find it easier to create surveys using voice because there's less like complexity around it? Like you're just putting a question, getting an answer. And do you find that a big, I guess, feature of it that anyone can create and get feedback without having to get too technical with like, should I use a 10-point scale, a 5-point scale? Should I use this wording or that wording? Because I always find that with text and voice or questions, it's a little bit easier to get a response without having to be, a PhD in stats or anything like that.
Right. Honestly, I would say, just being honest, no, I wouldn't say that because most of the surveys that are sent out are a mix of text and voice-based
Hmm,
questions. Those yield the highest response rates. So when
interesting.
you like, let's say you send an NPS question
Hmm.
and then you follow that up with voice. So a big problem that we've seen is a lot of companies that do like NPS, they get their score, whether let's say it's 7 out of 10 or
Hmm.
whatever it is, they don't have context into why they received that score. So using voice after to understand the why behind some of the answers for the multiple choice questions or stuff like that. So
Interesting.
I would say it's still it's easy to create a voice form. It's pretty easy to create a survey in any
Hmm.
product, whether it's like Google Forms or any of the
Hmm.
other tools out there. It's the same process, super simple,
Hmm.
but yeah, I would say the customers that have created a few of them now have definitely got the hang of it, and we do help the new ones as well. It's
Hmm.
super easy, but I would say the best voice forms are usually 2 to 3 questions, and include 1 to 2 voice questions and usually a text-based question as well.
Hmm. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like you said, having context answers is also very important to figure out
Hmm.
why. Like the reason why is always very challenging, especially I think, like you said, when you're creating a business or doing anything where it's a little bit more of a blue sky approach, or a little bit unique, where it's like,
Yeah,
hey, do they the question we're asking is it because they understand what we're asking, they understand the product, and they just don't like it, or they do like it, or is it like the classic example I is that like you ask them a question, and they're like, well, they don't I guess without saying they don't understand it, but they don't really understand the question you're asking, and you get the response with voice is the idea that they may not fully understand what you were asking the question, or at least the reason behind it. Always the classic thing we always to do is that asking a lot of founders is when you ask them like, oh, what do your customers think? And then the worst answer is my customers just don't get it. Like they just don't understand my product. If they understood it, it would be great. And then most of the time it would be the mentor being like, that's a you problem. You have to explain to them what your product is or what it is. And I think that's what's a good point about voice and why, especially when it comes to building MVPs, is getting like face to face or at least speaking interviews is to understand like where's that disconnect? Do they not like your product, or are you just not good at explaining it? And you have the classic like we are the Uber of X or we're the
yeah,
Snapchat of Y, which
yeah,
I dislike when people use that comparison because then it's a little bit too pigeonholed. But like you were
for
saying, it's
sure.
the idea that you got to understand the reason behind something. So,
Oh no, for sure. And something else that we're
mhm,
finding is like our like our product is not our survey tool, and it's something that we've had to come to grips with.
mm,
Our product is really the insight that our customers are collecting. However they get there,
interesting.
if they have to send a carrier pigeon to someone's house to get that insight, they really don't care. Like actually, like whatever the best method is, whether maybe it's like a like, who knows? You know what I mean?
Mhm,
They don't care how they have to get it, as long as they get it. And it seems like voice really is the best way to get it, at least right now. If it changes, maybe we'll be pigeon carrierpigeonform.com. I don't know.
mhm,
Probably not. But the product we've come to grips is the insight that they're actually collecting. And when these brands are able to understand more about their customers, they
mhm.
actually can make more money, which is what every single company at the end of the day, whether they say it or not, wants to do. And so, yeah, I went on a little rant there, but
Mhm. No,
I think
I think that's a great advice is that your product a lot of times isn't like your product in the sense like you're saying like you do voice form, but the end result being like better insights to
is
create
a
more
product.
money. Like that is the problem you're trying to solve. I think that's always a good realization for a lot of founders realizing like what are we here to solve? Because
Yeah,
that problem will never go away, but how you do it, your product may adapt along the way. But as long as that core, like you said, making your customers heard, that's the mission you're solving, whether it be through voice, whether it be through carrier pigeon, or maybe now because carrier pigeons like maybe have gone extinct, like drones. So like
yeah.
whatever it is, being able to get that end result at the end of the day is always going to be what the company is about.
Well, before I remember, I was always pitching like new features and like our survey tool, and a lot of people were like, "All right, like cool. What is this gonna do for me? Like, I don't care
Mhm,
if you have like dark mode. Like, it doesn't
mhm,
change my life." Um, So yeah, just like realizing that the product is actually what is derived from the actual surveys or the forms or whatever we're
Mhm.
analyzing.
It's very good insight, I think, and a lot of times takes founders a little bit longer to figure that out. That their product
Took
a
us
lot
a
of times
little while.
isn't
Yeah,
the thing they're trying to solve here. So what does the future look now? Obviously, you went through the program, you have some success. Like when I mean, this is a great question, but obviously, like always challenging. Is like, what does the future look like? Like, is there new avenues you're looking at? Is there things you want to build out? Is there any like the 5 year plan, or at least like the future, if you had to summarize it in a few words?
yeah. There's a few things I can't say, but the
Hmm.
future is exciting for us.
Hmm.
We will be the go-to trusted place for collecting and analyzing voice. It will happen,
Hmm.
whether it's now or it's in 20 years. We're gonna
Hmm.
stick around. It's exciting right now because we're getting lots of really new customers. It seems like we found our niche,
Hmm.
and we're gonna grow the team pretty soon, which is great. Um, and we've we're getting close to just like really finding our stride.
Hmm.
Our customers are finding value, and some of our customers are seeing the same value over and over across many different verticals. So, like, yeah, I'd say the future looks bright for us.
For sure. And if people want to follow along or get in contact or kind of learn more, what's the best way to learn more about the product and you?
Well, you could. I've recently tried to start posting more on LinkedIn over the last month. You could follow along on LinkedIn and on my profile or our LinkedIn page at Voiceform. Find us at voiceform.com. You could call me at 416-258-0024, or you can email me at philip@voiceform.com, or literally you can just reach out to me any way that you can figure out, and I'll always answer. Or you can reach out to our team at hello@voiceform.com. I have an entire list of things you can do to reach out. You can mail us, you can knock on my door, um, whatever it takes. Yeah.